The great hall of the Stellar Alliance sparkled under thousands of artificial stars. Representatives from every major species filled the massive meeting space, their voices creating a buzz of 1,000 languages and 1,000 worries. But one seat carried more importance than all the others. Ambassador Nora Reeves sat stiffly at the long black table, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. Her suit fit her like armor, designed to project power and confidence. Beside her sat General Julian Ward, the human military representative. His broad shoulders and quiet demeanor made his face impossible to read. Both had heard the whispers, the mocking tones that slipped from other delegates when they thought humans couldn't hear. Humans are weak. Humans are too emotional. They won't dare start a war. Nora tightened her jaw. They had come here to discuss peace after the Krillian uprising, to heal wounds that the Alliance had caused. After decades of loyalty, humanity had been betrayed. During the battles on Nova Point, their colonies were left undefended. Their civilians had been killed. And now the Alliance wanted to negotiate without even offering an apology. A chime sounded across the hall. President Toran of the Alliance, a shimmering creature with snake-like features from the Andari race, floated to the center platform. His transparent skin glowed with self-importance as he began to speak. "Esteemed members," he said with an oily voice, "we gather to extend our hand of peace to humanity. Let us move past these misunderstandings." Nora's fingers twitched. Misunderstandings? The bodies buried under the ruins of New Portland would call it something else. Massacre, betrayal, cowardice. General Ward leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "They're playing us for fools." She didn't need the reminder. The Andari continued, "It would be unfortunate if humanity chose to make things worse. After all, no species can survive alone." The room filled with polite laughter, but not from the humans. Nora stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the black floor. Every head turned. When she spoke, her voice cut through the room like a blade. "Ambassador Reeves of Earth speaking," she announced. "We came in good faith. We buried our dead, rebuilt our homes, and believed that justice would win. Instead, we find mockery." The hall grew still. No one expected the humans to speak up. No one expected them to be angry. Nora continued, her voice growing stronger. "We are not here to beg for scraps of dignity. We are not here to forget the innocent lives lost because of your politics." President Tehran's face tightened. He tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand, silencing him. "You took our trust," she said, her voice now low and dangerous, "and spat on it. You believe our humanity is a weakness. You think because we grieve, because we hope, that we won't fight. You are wrong." General Ward stood up beside her. Across the hall, a few more humans, scientists, diplomats, soldiers, rose too. A slow, deliberate movement. "We hereby withdraw from the Alliance peace talks," Nora declared. "Effective immediately." Gasps echoed from every corner of the room. The Andari president looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You cannot simply—" he began. "We can," Julian Ward interrupted, his voice a deep growl. "And we will." With mechanical precision, the human delegation turned and walked away. Their boots hit the polished floor like war drums. The other species watched, frozen, some with disbelief, some with fear. Because deep down they remembered what humanity was capable of when cornered. They remembered Earth's wars, Earth's survival, Earth's unbreakable spirit. They realized too late that they hadn't insulted a fragile species. They had poked a beast. And now that beast was walking away, teeth bared, and patience gone. The humans didn't just walk out of the hall, they walked out of the Alliance itself. The human ships waiting in orbit received the message within minutes. Without hesitation, the massive fleet turned away from the diplomatic stations and headed back toward Earth. No threats, no warnings, just a cold, silent withdrawal. Within hours, the Alliance's private communication channels exploded with panic. Some called for emergency meetings, others demanded punishments. A few, the wiser few, whispered that maybe it was already too late. On the bridge of the UHS Courage, Admiral Fiona Riley watched the stars shift as the ship jumped into faster-than-light travel. She had been briefed on the situation minutes before the withdrawal. Her orders were simple. Return home. Prepare. Set course for Sol Prime, she said, her voice calm. But inside, she felt the fire building. Humanity had played nice for too long. They had been the peacekeepers, the bridge builders, the idealists, no more. As the Courage sped through the void, Fiona opened the classified files that had been quietly shared with every human warship. Projects that had been kept secret even from most Alliance allies. Weapons humanity had never needed, or never dared to use until now. Back at the Alliance Central Command, chaos brewed behind gilded walls. A crisis council had been called, no cameras, no public announcements, just fear clinging to every corner of the marble chamber. President Toran paced in front of his assistants. "We underestimated them," he admitted, his scales darkening. "They are emotional, but emotion drives them. It fuels them." Admiral Zex of the Krillians, a large insect-like creature, shifted uneasily. "They've always been dangerous, even during peace. They expanded faster than any race, innovated faster, fought harder." "And now?" asked Counselor Mira of the Safiri, a species known for their cold logic. "Now we have given them every reason to become our enemies." Toran slumped into his seat. "We must find a way to contain them before they strike back. Strike back." The words hung in the air, heavier than gravity, because deep in their shared history books, they all remembered Earth's darkest moments. They remembered the Terran Wars when humanity had nearly destroyed itself and somehow survived. They remembered the Plague Years when humans faced extinction and clawed their way back from the edge. They remembered that humans didn't just fight wars. They became wars. Back on Earth, news of the peace talk breakdown spread like wildfire. Governments united overnight. Factories that had been idle since the last space treaty roared back to life. Hidden fleets reactivated on the dark sides of moons. Ancient war plans, once locked away as relics of a violent past, flashed back to operational status. And the people didn't panic. They prepared. They remembered the videos of their burned colonies. They remembered the smug faces of alien diplomats offering hollow apologies. And they remembered in the core of their being that humanity had always survived by doing the one thing they did better than any other species: getting angry. Nora Reeves watched from the observation deck of the human command ship, her hands resting lightly on the railing as she stared into the swirling colors of hyperspace. "This isn't revenge," she said quietly to herself. "It's survival." Far across the stars, where politicians still argued over treaties and payments, somewhere deep inside every alien heart that had laughed at humanity's pain, a cold, creeping fear began to grow. They had not seen humanity's wrath yet, but they would soon. The first blow wasn't loud. It didn't come with a grand fleet tearing across the stars or a declaration of war broadcast to the galaxy. It came in silence. Alliance trade routes, once busy highways of goods and diplomacy, started collapsing one by one. Ships found their systems hacked mid-jump, their navigation scrambled by viruses so advanced even the Safiri couldn't solve them. Cargo vanished. Supplies dried up. Whole sectors went dark, cut off by invisible hands, and not a single human ship was seen. On Nova Reach, an Ondari mining outpost reported a sudden drop in power levels. Before they could send a distress call, their reactors overloaded and shut down. No explosions, no casualties, just a blackout that left them stranded, shivering under the cold stars. The humans weren't fighting with guns. They were fighting with brilliance, precision, ruthlessness. Back on Earth, General Julian Ward stood before a room full of military commanders, scientists, and political leaders. The room was dark, lit only by a giant holographic map of the galaxy with key alliance systems marked in red. "We're not waging war," he said evenly. "We're teaching them fear." He pointed at the map, and system after system began blinking, a pattern, emerging that only a human mind could truly appreciate. "We will make them doubt every light they see in the sky," he continued, "every message, every promise of safety. We'll remind them why humanity was always considered too dangerous to truly trust." Admiral Riley stepped forward. "Phase 2 is ready, sir." Julian nodded once. "Begin." Meanwhile, at the Alliance High Command, the leaders were unraveling. "Entire sectors are reporting technical failures," Admiral Zex hissed, his wings twitching furiously. "Our ships won't jump. Our communication buoys are offline. It's sabotage," Mira said, her tone sharp with alarm. "Coordinated. Deliberate." President Toran clutched his head, the gleam of his skin dimming with stress. "They're destabilizing our entire infrastructure without firing a single shot. How is this possible?" An assistant hurried forward, trembling. "Sir, we've intercepted fragments of code left in the ruins of the navigation relays. It's human. Old human." "Old?" Toran snapped. "Yes, sir," the aide said, swallowing hard. "Pre-alliance era, military grade. It's brutal, no safeguards. It doesn't just disrupt systems, it teaches them to self-destruct." The room fell into a sickening silence. Old human warfare wasn't elegant. It was raw, merciless, designed in an era when survival meant completely destroying threats. The Alliance had forgotten that part of humanity, but humanity hadn't. In a desperate attempt to save face, the Alliance ordered a peace envoy, an emergency delegation of diplomats, soldiers, and scholars, to travel to Earth and offer formal payments for damages. The humans received the request and ignored it. Days passed, weeks. The Alliance began losing border colonies to chaos. Minor species that had once relied on the Alliance for protection now found themselves vulnerable and angry. Pirates, warlords, and rebel groups sprang up like weeds, encouraged by the sudden collapse of law and order. The Alliance was rotting from the inside, and there wasn't a thing they could do to stop it. Still no human fleets, still no mass invasions. Just silence and fear. Nora Reeves watched the reports from the command deck of the UHS Defender. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, calm and steady. "How long until they break?" she asked, not turning. General Ward, standing beside her, answered without hesitation. "They're already broken. They just don't know it yet." She nodded, her voice as cold as space itself. "Then it's time they learned." In the vast emptiness between the stars, humanity waited, not for permission, not for forgiveness, but for the perfect moment to strike the final blow. And this time, when it came, the galaxy would have no warning, no second chance. Just the raw, unstoppable fury of a species that had been mocked, wounded, and now fully awake. The first true strike hit the Alliance core worlds like a hammer. It wasn't missiles or bombs, it was worse. At exactly 200 hours Alliance Central Time, every major financial hub across 27 inhabited planets collapsed. Bank accounts were wiped clean, corporate systems melted under precision data attacks. Power grids overloaded. Trade fleets lost all command signals and drifted helplessly. The Alliance's heart didn't just skip a beat, it flatlined. News feeds, once carefully controlled to project stability, couldn't hide the chaos anymore. Footage leaked. Panicked citizens looting supply centers, military officers abandoning posts, planets declaring independence overnight. And through it all, not a single human soldier had stepped onto an Alliance world. On Earth, in a war room buried, deep beneath the mountains, Nora Reeves stood before a quiet, waiting crowd. "Our goal was never conquest," she said. "It was respect." The men and women in the room, hardened commanders, strategists, and survivors of 100 broken treaties, nodded grimly. "They had their chance at peace," she continued. "They chose arrogance. They chose betrayal." She turned toward General Ward, who was already entering the next phase. "Now," she said, voice like iron, "they will learn humility." Above the ruined economies of the Alliance, new signals began to broadcast from seemingly nowhere. Human-made satellites, hidden, cloaked, and buried deep within neutral space, sprang to life, pushing a single message across every channel in every language. "You should have remembered what we are. Now you will." Alliance leaders scrambled to respond. Emergency councils were called. New treaties drafted. They begged, pleaded, offered resources, planets, even tribute. But humanity didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, human science vessels arrived at neutral colonies, not with weapons, but with aid, medicine, food, clean water, technology, all free, no demands, no political posturing. The colonies abandoned by the Alliance welcomed the humans with open arms. It wasn't just a war of bombs anymore. It was a war of hearts. Alliance loyalists screamed betrayal. Neutral systems called it salvation. And the cracks in the once mighty Alliance turned into gaping wounds. At the Alliance High Command, panic had twisted into something worse: despair. "They're winning the outer systems," Admiral Zek said, his mandibles clicking nervously, "without firing a shot." President Torin leaned heavily against the command table, his skin so dim it looked almost gray. "We tried to control them," he rasped. "Now we have nothing left to offer but surrender." "And would they even accept it?" Mira asked bitterly. "After what we did?" No one answered because deep down they all knew the truth. Humanity had outgrown them. They had thought the humans were children, wild, emotional, reckless. They hadn't realized that the humans were something else entirely: survivors, builders, and when provoked, destroyers. On the bridge of the Defender, Nora watched the newest. Reports flow in, worlds changing allegiance, Alliance fleets defecting, unwilling to die for a government that had already abandoned them. She allowed herself a small, grim smile. "They're ready," General Ward said beside her. Nora nodded. "Then it's time to make them an offer." "Terms of surrender?" he asked. "No," she said, her eyes burning. "Terms of existence." Because this was no longer about justice. This was about reshaping the galaxy itself. And humanity wasn't going to ask for a seat at the table anymore. They were going to build a new one on the ruins of everything that had dared to betray them. The message went out across every surviving Alliance channel, cutting into broadcasts, overriding local networks, flashing onto every screen from the core worlds to the edge of explored space. It was simple, ruthless, unmistakably human, a single black screen, white text burning bright. "The Alliance is dead, a new order is coming. You have one choice: join us or be forgotten." There were no negotiations, no second offers, no smiling diplomats. The galaxy, which once thought itself mighty, was now on its knees before a species it had spent centuries underestimating. On Earth, the United Human Council, newly formed, united for the first time in history without internal factions, watched the responses pour in. Outlying planets rushed to pledge allegiance, desperate for protection. Former allies of the Alliance scrambled to declare neutrality or beg forgiveness. Even some high-ranking Alliance officials quietly sent offers to defect, to serve, to survive. And the core Alliance worlds? They hesitated. They still believed, in their arrogance, that humanity would allow them to bargain. Nora Reeves leaned forward over the conference table, her hands steepled under her chin. "Hit them," she ordered. Cold and final. No hesitation. Within minutes, coordinated human strike teams, cybernetic specialists, orbital skirmishers, stealth fleets descended like phantoms on the remaining Alliance strongholds. No cities were bombed. No civilian populations were slaughtered. Instead, command centers blinked off the grid. Military installations found their targeting systems turned against them. Key government officials simply disappeared. One by one, the Alliance's last pillars crumbled to dust. At Alliance High Command, President Toran watched the final reports trickle in, his body sagging under the weight of realization. "We should have feared them," he whispered. Beside him, Mira closed her many eyes, her voice a hollow shell of what it once was. "We mocked them for being ruled by emotion. We forgot that rage is an emotion too." Across the galaxy, planets lit, their skies with new banners, black and silver, emblazoned with the symbol of humanity. Not a symbol of conquest, a symbol of survival, a warning to every species who thought mercy was weakness, a promise that Earth would never bow again. On the bridge of the UHS Defender, Nora Reeves stood watching the stars drift by. General Julian. Ward came to stand beside her, handing her a tablet displaying the full surrender of the last Alliance stronghold. "We've won," he said. Nora didn't smile, didn't cheer. She just stared into the dark, endless night. "This isn't the end," she said, quietly. "It's just the beginning." Because humans weren't just survivors anymore. They were the architects of a new era, an era born from betrayal, forged in rage, tempered by loss, an era where no one would ever dare to underestimate them again. From that day forward, across every corner of the galaxy, two unspoken truths would reign: never betray a human, never corner a beast, and humanity, once mocked for their fragile emotions, now ruled with an iron will that no force could ever break. In the months that followed the Alliance's fall, the galaxy changed in ways no one could have predicted. Human. Patrol fleets now swept across the star lanes, not as invaders, but as enforcers. Piracy plummeted to near extinction. Trade resumed between worlds that had been left to rot by the old Alliance. Diseases that had ravaged colonies for decades were wiped out within weeks, thanks to human medical breakthroughs that had once been hidden away, hoarded by corrupt Alliance councils. For many, life actually became better, safer. But beneath the order, something darker simmered. Humanity hadn't just stepped into the Alliance's shoes. They'd burned the shoes, scattered the ashes, and built boots of their own. Boots meant for marching, not for diplomacy. The Human Council called it the stabilization, a galaxy rebuilt under humanity's protection. Yes, but also under humanity's watchful, unforgiving gaze. Every planetary governor, every corporate leader, every fleet admiral was hand-picked, approved by Earth command centers, and checked for loyalty to the new order. Freedom still existed, but it had tight borders now. Justice was swift, and mercy was rationed. In the shadows of shining cities and prosperous colonies, resentment began to grow. Small at first, quiet, but real. On the mining world of Basal 3, a group of alien workers whispered in hidden tunnels. They spoke of human arrogance, of betrayal. They remembered promises of partnership that now looked more like domination. On the agricultural moon of Iridian, a Sephiri elder watched human engineers optimize their sacred fields, turning ancient traditions into efficient, soulless farming grids. She smiled at the soldiers and nodded at the officials, but in her heart, she buried a seed of hate. And on the old ruins of Nova Point, where so much human blood had been spilled during the Krillian, betrayal, something worse stirred, not resentment, not whispers, plans. Human intelligence agencies, far sharper now than the Alliance's bloated bureaucracies, picked up traces. Words caught in intercepted messages: rebellion, restoration, revenge. General Julian Ward sat with Nora Reeves in the Situation Room deep inside Earth's fortified command complex. Reports filled the holographic table between them, unrest growing like cracks in ice. "They're ungrateful," Julian said, his voice low and full of iron. "We saved them. They owe us." Nora didn't answer immediately. She stared at a slowly spinning map of the galaxy, dots blinking where incidents of sabotage, protests, and low-level attacks had been recorded. Finally, she said, "No species likes being ruled, even by those who saved them." Julian snorted. "We gave them security and took their pride," she replied. He studied her, frowning. "You don't regret what we did, do you?" She met his gaze, steady as the pull of gravity. "No, it was necessary. But don't mistake survival for loyalty, Julian. They will rise against us eventually." "And when they do?" he asked. Nora's smile was cold, almost pitying. "We'll remind them again." Across the stars, the human dominion, as the galaxy had come to call it, tightened its grip. But cracks were appearing. Small alliances formed between races that had once despised each other, bonded now by a common fear of their human rulers. Secret gatherings discussed ancient weapons, lost technologies, hidden systems untouched by human hands. They spoke of patience, of striking when the beast grew comfortable, when it forgot that fear could be a double-edged sword. But humanity had survived worse. They had clawed their way back from worse betrayals, deeper wounds. And Earth itself, it had become something new. Not just a planet, but a fortress. Layers of defenses wrapped it like armor. Orbital rings bristled with cannons that could slice a fleet in half. 1,000 sleeper ships hidden in deep space stood ready to strike at any uprising. The galaxy thought it could wait for humanity to grow weak. It didn't realize humanity had been forged by waiting, by enduring, by preparing. On the observation deck of the UHS Defender, Nora Reeves watched Earth spinning below, beautiful, terrible, unbreakable. "This is peace," she said softly. Beside her, Julian Ward crossed his arms. "Until it's not." And somewhere in the deep cold between stars, seeds of rebellion cracked open, unaware that they weren't sowing freedom. They were sowing their own destruction. Again, it started with a whisper. On Iridian Moon, a shipment bound for a human outpost vanished in transit. No distress call, no wreckage, just an empty shipping lane where a freighter used to be. At first, Command assumed it was pirates. After all, small-time raiders still prowled the edges of space, but then another freighter disappeared, and a third. Within a month, entire convoys were being picked off in deep space, their signals scrambled, their escorts bypassed as if the enemy knew exactly where to hit. General Julian Ward reviewed the footage personally. What he saw made his blood run cold, highly coordinated attacks executed with brutal efficiency. Whoever was behind this wasn't improvising. They were organized, trained, they had been preparing. "We underestimated them," he admitted to Nora Reeves in a rare moment of frustration. "We thought they were scattered, broken." Nora sat at the head of the council table, fingers drumming lightly against the polished steel. Around her, holograms floated. Reports of sabotage, uprisings, even assassinations of human officials in distant systems. "They're not trying to defeat us," she said, her voice low. "They're trying to make us bleed." And they were succeeding. Human supply lines stretched thin across the stars, trying to hold the fragile new order together. Every attack chipped away, at morale, at control, at the image of invincibility humanity had built so carefully. On the mining world of Basal 3, A rebel broadcast pierced through human jamming fields for the first time. Grainy footage showed alien workers raising banners, not alliance banners, but a new symbol, a black circle broken by a silver lightning bolt, the symbol of resistance. The message was short, defiant. We remember, we endure, we rise. Across the Dominion, other systems stirred. Planets that had accepted human aid began questioning the price of their salvation. Governors hesitated. Soldiers looked over their shoulders, wondering if the friend beside them might turn traitor. Nora knew this was coming. She had expected it, but not so soon. At a meeting of the Dominion's high command, tempers flared. "We should crush them," Admiral Riley barked. "Make examples of the rebel worlds. Show them what defiance costs." "And drive 100 more systems into their arms," snapped Director Harmon of the Intelligence Division. "Brute force won't work this time." Julian Ward stood silently at the end of the room, arms crossed, until Nora nodded for him to speak. "Built our power on fear," he said. "But fear fades. Memory fades. We need something more." Nora tilted her head. "Go on." Julian leaned over the holographic map of Dominion space. Red dots marked rebel activity, a slow-spreading cancer. "We don't just retaliate," he said. "We rewrite the war, control the narrative, turn every rebellion into a tragedy. Not for us, but for them. Make them doubt. Make them regret." Nora's eyes gleamed. It was ruthless, cold, perfect. Within days, Operation Iron Veil was launched. It started small. News feeds broadcasting stories of rebel attacks killing innocent civilians. Images, some real, some carefully edited, of rebel heroes turning on their own people, causing famine, disease, collapse. In a galaxy wired together by information, truth became just another weapon. Rebel movements struggled to hold their support. Whispers spread that perhaps the humans weren't the monsters after all. That maybe, just maybe, life under Dominion rule was better than life in endless chaos. But the resistance wasn't naive. They adapted. Leaders like Zari Velen, a Sefiri war veteran, emerged from the shadows, rallying planets not just with promises of freedom, but with brutal, simple math. Fight now or live forever under the human boot. Under Velen's leadership, cells merged, resources pulled, plans tightened. The rebels learned from humanity. They grew smarter, harder. And in the dark corners of the galaxy where no human eyes watched, they began to build weapons humanity hadn't seen before. Weapons born from stolen, human tech, twisted by alien hands. For the first time since the fall of the Alliance, humanity faced an enemy that didn't just survive under pressure. They thrived in it. On the Dominion's observation deck, Nora Reeves watched the latest encrypted messages come in, her jaw tight. "They're evolving," Julian said, reading over her shoulder. Nora didn't respond immediately. She simply stared into the deep black beyond the glass, where the future waited, bloody and uncertain. "We taught them too well," she murmured at last. And somewhere in the galaxy, hidden by shattered moons and dead suns, the resistance sharpened its blades, ready to carve its message into the stars. We endure, we rise, we are coming. The first real battle wasn't fought in space. It was fought on a dead world called Orson's Reach, a forgotten rock once used for mineral extraction, now little more than ruins and dust storms. But for the rebels, it was the perfect ground. And for humanity, it would become a line they could not afford to lose. General Julian Ward stood aboard the UHS Courage, overlooking the scarred surface below. Rebel forces had fortified the ruins, dug tunnels, built hidden gun nests. It was a fortress born from desperation and cunning. Julian turned to Nora Reeves, who stood beside him, helmet under one arm. "They're daring us to come down," he said, grimly. Nora nodded, her face hard. "Then we'll answer." The invasion began at dawn. Dropships screamed through Orson's thin atmosphere, unleashing squads of elite human soldiers, the Dominion's finest. They moved like ghosts, cutting through outer defenses, hammering into the rebel lines. But this time, the rebels didn't run. They didn't scatter like frightened animals. They fought for every trench humanity took. They lost good fighters for. Every bunker cleared, 3 more sprang up. The rebels moved with brutal efficiency, using old Alliance tunnels to launch surprise attacks, ambushes, sabotage. By nightfall, the dusty plains ran red with blood, human and alien alike. Nora stood in the command center, grimacing as casualty reports flooded in. "They've unified," Julian said, watching the battle unfold on a wall of holographic screens. "Different species, different tactics, but one cause." Nora exhaled slowly, forcing down the flicker of anger in her chest. "We forced them to find common ground," she said. "We turned enemies into brothers. And now, they were paying the price." Outside, the battle raged with a ferocity that stunned even hardened Dominion veterans. Rebel banners, the Broken Circle and Lightning Bolt flew defiantly over captured human artillery posts. Old Alliance war machines, resurrected and modified, rolled out of hidden bunkers, blasting apart human positions. For the first time since humanity had risen to dominance, it tasted bitter, undeniable resistance. In the burning ruins of Orson's central city, Julian and Nora personally led the final assault. Blaster fire tore through the smoke-thick air. Soldiers screamed. The ground shook under the roar of ancient tanks and orbital bombardments. Julian slammed into cover behind a collapsed wall, blood trickling from a gash above his brow. Nora crouched beside him, pistol drawn. "This isn't just rebellion," he shouted, over the chaos. "It's a movement." Nora's teeth clenched. She fired into the mist, dropping a rebel soldier who had gotten too close. "Then we end it. Here. Now." They pushed forward, their soldiers rallying behind them. Street by bloody street, they clawed their way toward the rebel command center. An old mining control tower turned into a fortress. Inside, Zari Velen waited. The Safiri war leader, scarred and unbowed, stood before a battered console, watching the human advance. He knew the end was near, but it didn't matter. Around him, rebel survivors armed explosive charges, prepared last stands, readied themselves to die because victory wasn't measured by survival anymore. It was measured by the memory they would leave behind. As human forces burst into the tower, blasters lighting up the darkness, Velen activated the final command. Across Orson's reach, explosives rigged deep underground detonated. Not enough to destroy the planet, but enough to bury every human soldier under tons of rubble. Nora and Julian barely had time to realize what was happening. "Get out!" Julian bellowed, shoving soldiers toward the dropships. Nora grabbed a wounded Marine and dragged him across the shaking ground, heart hammering as towers crumbled and firestorms roared through the streets. Above them, the sky split with desperate evacuation ships trying to escape the inferno. Hours later, orbiting high above the dead, burning world, the cost was clear. Thousands dead, ships lost, humanity's illusion of invincibility shattered. Nora sat in the medical bay, blood smeared. Across her armor, her mind numb with exhaustion. Julian, face bandaged, stood at her side. "They made their choice," he said, voice rough. Nora looked up at him, eyes burning. "And so will we." Because Orson's reach wasn't a defeat. It was a warning. The galaxy wouldn't be ruled by kindness. It would be ruled by fire. And if they wanted war, if they wanted to rise against Earth, humanity would meet them with a fury they had never seen before. No more mercy, no more patience, no more chances. The beast had been awakened once. Now it would never sleep. Zari Velen survived Orson's reach. Against all odds, a small rebel shuttle had pulled him from the collapsing tower moments before the final charges detonated. Now, he stood in the dimly lit meeting chamber of a secret base hidden in the rings of a gas giant far beyond human patrol routes. Around him gathered representatives from a dozen different species, former enemies united by the shared threat of human dominance. Their faces showed fear, hope, determination. Orson's reach was just the beginning, Zari said, his voice carrying across the silent room. We proved something today, not just to ourselves, but to them. Humans can bleed. A rumble of agreement passed through the gathered rebels. Zari continued, activating a holographic display. Our network has grown. 5 more systems have joined us secretly. Former Alliance military officers, scientists, engineers, people who remember freedom. But we lost so many, said a Krillian commander, her compound eyes reflecting the light of the hologram. Yes, Zari admitted, and we will lose more. But for the first time, we have something the humans don't expect from us. What's that? Asked. Another rebel leader. Patience, Zari replied. They expect us to break, to rage, to throw ourselves at their defenses. They understand fury because it's their language, but we will learn something new. He gestured to a Safiri scientist who stepped forward, producing a small metallic sphere. This, Zari explained, is a translation of human technology we've been developing for years. A virus that doesn't just attack their systems, it learns from them, adapts, evolves. The sphere glowed faintly blue, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. We call it Echo, because it will turn their own strength against them. Back on Earth, the aftermath of Orson's reach manifested as cold, calculated fury. The Human Council convened in emergency session, and the decision was unanimous. Operation Sundering Nora Reeves addressed the assembled military command, her voice no longer filled with anger but with something more dangerous. Icy resolve. Operation. Sundering begins now, she announced. We will no longer fight shadow wars with these rebels. We will show them the full might of human determination. The plan was comprehensive, brutal, and unlike anything the Dominion had attempted before. Every system with suspected rebel activity would face a choice: surrender all rebel elements or face complete isolation. No trade, no communication, no aid. The colonies dependent on regular supply shipments would feel the pressure first. Julian Ward oversaw the deployment personally. Massive interdiction fields, technology once deemed too aggressive even for the old wars, were positioned at key jump points. Colony after colony found themselves suddenly cut off, their skies empty of the usual traffic that sustained modern life. On Basel III, the mining world that had been whispering of rebellion, the effects were immediate. Food shortages appeared within days, medical supplies dwindled. The planetary governor, once secretly sympathetic to the resistance, now faced thousands of desperate citizens. When he broadcasted an emergency plea to nearby systems, only silence answered. This is what happens when you stand with terrorists. The message finally came, delivered by a cold-faced human officer on all channels. The path back is simple. Deliver the leaders of your resistance to Dominion authorities. Until then, you stand alone. Across 17 systems, the same scene played out. Fear replaced defiance. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Former rebels found themselves hunted not by human soldiers, but by their own people, desperate to end the blockade. On her flagship, Nora watched the reports with a face carved from stone. Julian stood beside her, troubled but resolute. They're breaking, he said quietly. Some are, she agreed. The weak ones, the desperate ones, but not the dangerous ones. She was right. In the shadows between systems, Zari Velen's network grew stronger. Each act of human cruelty sent new recruits to his cause. The core resistance, hardened, disciplined, invisible, moved their operations deeper into unmapped space. And Echo, their adaptive virus, continued to develop. In the third month of the blockades, something unexpected happened. A human colony on the outer rim, New Avalon, publicly denounced Operation Sundering. Their governor, Helena Frost, a decorated war veteran who had fought in the original campaign against the Alliance, addressed the Dominion in an unauthorized broadcast. "What we are doing is wrong," she declared, her weathered face solemn. "We overthrew one tyrant only to become another. This was not the future our people died for at Nova Point." Within hours, Dominion security forces moved to arrest her, but they found the entire colony standing in their way. Human colonists who had once believed in the cause, now questioning everything they had fought for. For the first time, cracks appeared not just in the Dominion's control of alien worlds, but in humanity's united front itself. News of New Avalon's defiance spread, despite information blackouts. Other human colonies began to whisper. Had they gone too far? Had victory turned them into the very monsters they had once fought against? In the Dominion war room, the atmosphere grew tense. Director Harmon reported growing dissent within human ranks. Admiral Riley argued for swift, decisive action against New Avalon, an example to discourage others from similar defiance. Nora listened to both sides, her face unreadable. When she finally spoke, her words surprised everyone. "We will go to New Avalon," she said. "Not with warships, but with open communication. I want to hear what they have to say." Julian looked at her sharply. "You can't seriously be considering legitimizing their complaints." "I'm considering the possibility," she replied evenly, "that we have lost our way." The journey to New Avalon was tense. The rebel fleets, now growing bolder, had begun striking at Dominion supply ships. 3 times, Nora's convoy had to change course to avoid ambushes. But eventually, they reached the colony, a lush, green world where the first wave of human expansion had built cities that blended with the natural landscape rather than dominating it. Helena Frost met them on the landing pad, flanked not by soldiers but by ordinary citizens, farmers, teachers, engineers, people who had once believed in the Dominion's promise. "Welcome to New Avalon, Ambassador Reeves," she said formally, her gray hair whipping in the wind. "We've been expecting you." The meeting that followed was unlike any diplomatic exchange since the fall of the Alliance. There were no threats, no posturing, just hard, uncomfortable truths. "We've become what we hated," Helena said bluntly, laying out evidence of Dominion cruelty, of freedoms erased, of peoples subjugated. "We fought because we wanted justice. Look around you, Nora. Is this justice?" For the first time in years, Nora Reeves found herself without an immediate answer. She had been so focused on humanity's survival, on making the galaxy safe for her people, that she hadn't stopped to consider the cost. That night, alone in her quarters, she reviewed footage from across the Dominion, not the sanitized reports that reached Earth, but raw feeds from the blockaded worlds, children with hollow eyes, alien elders dying without medicine, former allies, looking at humans with the same fear they had once reserved for the worst predators in the galaxy. Julian found her there, staring at the screens, her face lined with exhaustion. "They're manipulating you," he said. "This is exactly what the rebels want, to make us doubt ourselves." "What if they're right?" she asked quietly. "What if we've gone too far?" "There is no too far when it comes to human survival," he insisted. "Everything we've done to protect our people." "At what point," she asked, turning to face him, "do we become the very thing we were protecting them from?" The question hung between them, unanswered. Back in rebel territory, Zari Velen received the news of New Avalon with cautious optimism. Division within human ranks was exactly what they needed, a crack in the seemingly impenetrable human unity. But he was no fool. He had studied human history thoroughly enough to know that they were most dangerous when cornered. "The time for Echo has come," he announced to his inner circle. While they're distracted with internal politics, we strike at their foundation. Echo was more than just a virus. It was an artificial intelligence designed to infiltrate and corrupt the massive network that controlled Dominion defense systems. Not to destroy them, but to subtly alter them. Change targeting parameters, reroute supply chains, whisper misinformation into the ears of commanders, sow chaos from within. On New Avalon, negotiations continued. Helena Frost had assembled representatives from other concerned human colonies, people who still believed in Earth but questioned the Dominion's methods. Together, they drafted what would become known as the New Avalon Accords, a proposed restructuring of human leadership, with checks and balances to prevent the kind of absolute power that had led to Operation Sundering. This could split us apart, Julian warned. The galaxy will see our division as weakness. Or, Nora countered, they could see it as strength, the ability to recognize when we've strayed from our principles. Their debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth. Echo had been deployed. Throughout the Dominion, systems were failing in strange, unpredictable ways. Defense networks identified friendly ships as hostile. Communication arrays broadcasted gibberish. Supply ships found themselves jumping to wrong coordinates. The Dominion wasn't collapsing, it was unraveling. Nora and Julian rushed back to Earth, leaving the New Avalon negotiations unfinished. What they found upon return was a military complex in disarray. The same precision tactics they had once used against the Alliance were now being turned against them, amplified by Echo's learning capabilities. It's in everything, Director Harmon reported grimly. Every system we touch becomes compromised. It's like fighting a ghost. Can we contain it? Julian demanded. Only one way, the technical chief responded. Complete system shutdown, reboot from secure backups. But we'd be blind and defenseless for at least 18 hours. Unacceptable, Julian snapped. They'd strike the moment we lowered our shields. Then we fight it manually, Nora decided. Old school, person to person, ship to ship. It was a desperate plan, a return to warfare before the age of hyper-connected systems. Human pilots who had grown dependent on targeting computers would need to trust their eyes. Commanders who relied on instantaneous galactic communication would need to make decisions in isolation. But it was the only way. As the order went out across human space to disconnect from the central network, Zari Velen prepared the final phase of his plan. With Echo causing chaos throughout Dominion systems, the combined rebel fleet, ships gathered from 100 worlds, crewed by beings who had once been enemies, converged on Earth itself. Not to destroy it, not for revenge, but to force a reckoning. The Battle of Sol's system, as history would later call it, wasn't fought with the gleaming precision of modern warfare. It was messy, chaotic, desperate. Human defenders, their advanced systems compromised, relied on training and instinct. Rebel forces, outgunned but determined, pressed forward despite heavy losses. Julian Ward commanded the defense from a hardened bunker beneath Earth's surface, coordinating forces through runners and analog radio when possible. Nora Reeves took to space herself, leading a squadron of fighters against the rebel vanguard. The fighting lasted 3 days. 3 days of burning ships and desperate stands. 3 days where the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. On the third day, as Earth's defenses began to falter, Zari Velen's command ship broke through to high orbit. He opened a direct channel to the human leadership, not to demand surrender, but something far more radical. "We don't want to destroy you," his message stated simply. "We want to talk, face to face, human and non-human, equal to equal. This cycle of dominance and rebellion ends today, one way or another." In the command bunker, opinions were divided. Many saw it as a trap, others as a sign of weakness. But Nora, watching from her damaged fighter as both human and rebel ships burned, in Earth's orbit, saw something else, an opportunity. Against Julian's fierce objections, she accepted the meeting. The summit took place on neutral ground, a space station at the edge of the solar system, stripped of weapons and staffed by representatives of both sides. Nora Reeves and Zari Velin sat across from each other, two leaders who had never met but whose decisions had shaped the lives of trillions. "Why should we trust you?" Nora asked bluntly. "You shouldn't," Zari replied with equal frankness. "Trust is earned, not given. But consider this. We could have continued this war until both sides were crippled. Instead, I'm here. What do you want? The same thing you claimed to want when you overthrew the alliance. Justice, freedom, security. The difference is, we believe these things must be for everyone, not just humans." The negotiations were hard, painful. Both sides had legitimate grievances. Both had committed atrocities in the name of survival. Neither was willing to simply surrender what they had fought for. But slowly, over days that stretched into weeks, a framework emerged. A new system, neither the old alliance's corrupt bureaucracy nor the Dominion's iron control. A true confederation of equals, with power distributed, with safeguards against any single species ever dominating the others again. Not everyone accepted it. Julian Ward and many human hardliners refused to participate, retreating to fortified colonies to continue the fight. Radical elements of the rebellion broke away as well, unsatisfied with compromise. But enough stayed. Enough believed that there could be a better way forward than endless cycles of oppression and rebellion. Stellar Covenant, as the new government was called, took its first fragile steps in the shadow of war. Representatives from 100 worlds gathered on a newly constructed station, Concordia, built at the exact midpoint between Earth and Saphiri Prime, a symbol of the balance they sought to maintain. Nora Reeves, no longer a Dominion ambassador, but Earth's representative to the Covenant, stood at the podium on the opening day, addressing a chamber filled with former enemies. "We have all learned harsh lessons," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "Humans learned that power without restraint corrupts even the most righteous cause. Our non-human allies learned that unity born of necessity can overcome the greatest of divides. Together, we have learned that the galaxy is too vast, too diverse, too complex for any single vision to encompass it all." She paused, looking across the faces before her, faces that had once been alien and threatening, now partners in a fragile peace. This covenant will not be perfect. There will be disagreements, there will be crises, there may even be conflicts. But what makes this different from what came before is simple. No one stands above the rest. We rise together, or we fall together. In the years that followed, the Covenant faced countless challenges. Old hatreds died slowly. Trust built even more slowly. The remnants of both the Dominion loyalists and the radical rebellion elements struck from the shadows, trying to shatter the fragile peace. But it held. On the 10th anniversary of the Covenant's formation, Nora Reeves and Zari Velin stood together on Concordia's observation deck, watching ships from 100 worlds passing peacefully through the adjacent jump point. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Zari asked. Nora shook her head slightly. "For a long time, I didn't think beyond survival, beyond making sure humanity would never be vulnerable again. And now?" She smiled. A real smile, not the cold, determined expression she had worn during the war years. "Now I think about building something that outlasts us, something better than what came before." "The old alliance thought they had built something eternal," Zari reminded her. "So did your Dominion." "The difference," Nora said, watching as a human trade ship and a Saphiri cruiser exchanged friendly signals as they passed, "is that they both believed in perfection, in final solutions. We know better." "What do we believe in, then?" he asked. Nora considered the question, watching the endless dance of ships and stars beyond the window. Change, she said finally. Growth. The understanding that today's answers will be tomorrow's questions. Not a perfect galaxy, but one that's always striving to be better. Somewhere in deep space, Julian Ward and his hardliners still plotted their return. Somewhere in the shadowlands between systems, rebel extremists still dreamed of revenge. The peace was imperfect, fragile, constantly tested. But it was peace. And in a galaxy that had known little but cycles of domination and rebellion, that was no small achievement. As Nora turned away from the window, she caught sight of a school group touring the station, young beings of a dozen species, moving together, laughing, learning each other's languages and customs. Children who would grow up knowing cooperation first, not fear. And for the first time since humanity had walked away from that Alliance meeting hall so many years ago, she felt something beyond pride, beyond determination, beyond the cold certainty of survival. She felt hope, not a naive hope that ignored the darkness of the past or the challenges of the future, but a tempered hope, forged in fire, tested by loss, strengthened by hardship, a hope that understood the price of failure and chose to move forward anyway. The galaxy would never be perfect, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be better than it had been before, not through domination, not through fear, but through the hardest lesson any species could learn, how to rise together rather than over each other. And that, Nora thought, as she watched the next generation move forward into their shared future, was worth fighting for.